Aaliyah stood at the window of Ethan's family home, watching the evening sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Behind her, she could hear his mother humming in the kitchen, the familiar sound wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She had spent countless evenings here helping with chores, sharing meals, becoming part of a family that wasn't yet officially hers. "You're thinking too much again," Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, that smile she loved playing on his lips. "I'm not thinking," she protested, though they both knew it was a lie. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I promise you, Aaliyah. As soon as I get back from this trip, we're doing this properly. No more delays. No more excuses." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But Ethan had been saying soon for 2 years now. Always one more deal, one more opportunity to make enough money so he could give her the life he thought she deserved. "You don't have to be rich for me to marry you," she whispered, not for the first time. "I know," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "But I have to be ready. For me." That was the thing about Ethan. His pride was both his greatest strength and his deepest wound. He was the eldest son, the one everyone depended on, the one who carried the weight of expectations like a second skin. His family wasn't wealthy, and he'd spent his whole life trying to change that. When Marcus, his best friend and the embodiment of everything Ethan wanted to be, had come to him with the business opportunity abroad, Ethan had seen it as his chance. Finally. A real opportunity to make the kind of money that would let him hold his head high when he asked for Aaliyah's hand properly. 1 year, Ethan promised, tilting her chin up to look at him. 1 year and I'll come back. And then nothing will stop us. I swear it. Aaliyah nodded, swallowing the fear that sat heavy in her chest. She didn't want him to go. Something about this felt wrong, though she couldn't name what. But she loved him, and love meant trusting him to chase his dreams, even when those dreams took him far away. Marcus had been at the house that evening, going over final details with Ethan. He'd caught Aaliyah's eye across the room and smiled. That charming, easy smile that had always made her slightly uncomfortable, though she'd never told Ethan that. There was something in the way Marcus looked at her, something that lingered a beat too long. "Take care of my family while I'm gone," Ethan had told her that last night, his hands cupping her face. "And take care of yourself. I'll call every week. I promise." The promises of young men in love are made of hope and good intentions. Neither of them knew then how little those promises could withstand. The first 7 months were exactly what Ethan had promised. Weekly calls that stretched into hours, his voice crackling over the distance as he told her about the business, about the country, about how much he missed her. Aaliyah would curl up on her bed, pressing the phone to her ear, letting his voice chase away the loneliness. She kept herself busy. She went to his family's home every few days, helping his mother with cooking and cleaning, sitting with his younger sister to help with homework. They had embraced her years ago as the daughter they didn't yet have by law but loved nonetheless. His mother would pat her hand and say, "Soon, my dear. Soon he'll come home and make you my daughter properly." Aaliyah's own mother had different opinions. "You're wasting your youth waiting for a man who hasn't even married you," her mother would say, her voice sharp with practical concern. "What if he doesn't come back? What if he finds someone else there? You have no claim on him, Aaliyah. Nothing legal, nothing binding." "I have his love," Aaliyah would reply. "That's enough." Her father, kinder and more romantic than her mother, would defend her choice. "Let the girl wait for the man she loves. There's honor in that." But her mother's warnings echoed in the quiet moments, planting seeds of doubt that Aaliyah tried desperately to ignore. Then came the 8th month and the calls stopped. At first, Aaliyah told herself it was just a busy period. Work must have gotten intense. The time difference was tricky. He'd call soon. A week passed. Then a month. She tried calling him. The number rang and rang, never answered. She reached out to Marcus's family, but they said Marcus hadn't been in touch either. The business must be demanding. Fear crept in slowly, then all at once. Ethan's mother started losing weight, the worry carving lines into her face. His sister cried at night. His father, a man of few words, grew even quieter, his eyes distant with an unnamed dread. Aaliyah held them together as best she could. "He's fine," she would say with a conviction she didn't feel. "He's just busy. He'll call soon." The first year passed with no word. Then the second year began to slip away. Aaliyah's mother's voice grew louder, more insistent. This is madness. He's gone. Accept it and move on with your life. But Aaliyah couldn't. Moving on would mean admitting that the future she'd built in her mind, marriage, children, growing old with Ethan, had been nothing but a beautiful lie. So she waited, even as hope became a knife she carried in her chest. It was in the third year that Marcus came back. Aaliyah was at Ethan's family home when she heard the commotion outside. She ran to the door with everyone else, her heart leaping with impossible hope. But it wasn't Ethan standing in the doorway. It was Marcus alone, his face grave. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Ethan's mother grabbed his arm. "Where is my son? Where is Ethan?" Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. We were working together, everything was going well, and then one day he vanished. I looked everywhere. I asked everyone. I don't know what happened to him. I think he might be dead." The sound that came from Ethan's mother was something Aaliyah would never forget. A wail of pure anguish that seemed to tear the air itself. Aaliyah stood frozen, unable to process the words. Dead. Ethan might be dead. No body. No proof. No closure. Just the absence of a man who had promised to come home. The months that followed were a blur of grief without release. How do you mourn someone when there's no grave to visit, no funeral to attend, no definitive end? Aaliyah moved through her days like a ghost. She went to work, came home, stared at walls. Her mother's voice became white noise. Her father's gentle concern couldn't reach her. She was hollowed out, a shell of the woman she'd been. She stopped going to Ethan's family home. She couldn't bear to see his mother's grief, couldn't stand the way his sister looked at her with pity and shared sorrow. She was drowning, and she couldn't save anyone else when she couldn't even save herself. It was in this fog of grief that her father's illness struck. At first it seemed manageable, fatigue, some pain. But tests revealed something far worse. Kidney failure. He would need extensive treatment, possibly a transplant. The costs were astronomical. Her father had spent his life as a humble man with modest means. He'd saved what he could, built a small life for his family. Now, watching him grow weaker each day, Aaliyah felt panic claw at her throat. They sold land. They sold jewelry. They borrowed from every relative who would listen. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The hospital bills piled up. Her father's condition worsened. The doctors spoke in grave tones about time running out. Aaliyah sat by his bedside one night, holding his frail hand, and felt something inside her break. She couldn't lose him too. She couldn't survive losing both the man she was supposed to marry and the man who had raised her. There was only one person she knew who had the kind of money that could save her father's life. Marcus. His office was in the wealthy part of the city, all glass and steel, and the kind of success Ethan had dreamed of achieving. Aaliyah felt small and desperate walking through those polished doors. Marcus's assistant led her to his office, and when he saw her, surprise flickered across his face before settling into concern. "Aaliyah? What are you doing here?" She explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's illness. The money they needed. The desperation that had brought her here. "I know it's too much to ask," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But for Ethan's sake, if you ever cared about him, please help me. Even a little. Anything you can do." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "How long are you going to keep mourning him?" he asked softly. Aaliyah looked up, confused. "What?" "Ethan. He's gone, Aaliyah. You loved him, I know. But he's not coming back. Marcus, please. I've liked you for a long time," he said, his voice intense. "Since before Ethan and I left. I was planning to wait to give you time. But seeing you here, seeing you suffering..." He reached out, tilting her chin up. "I don't want you to suffer anymore. I can help you. I can save your father. But not as Ethan's friend. As the man who wants to be with you." Aaliyah jerked back as if he'd struck her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying marry me. Let me take care of you. Let me give you the life Ethan never could. Nobody goes to that country and comes back, Aaliyah. He's gone. But I'm here." The room spun. This couldn't be happening. This man, Ethan's best friend, the person who was supposed to help her, was asking her to marry him while her father lay dying in a hospital bed. "No," she whispered. "No, you're his friend. Even if he's dead, how could you?" "Because I'm alive," Marcus said simply. "And so are you. And your father is dying. Aaliyah fled. She ran from that office, from those words, from the impossible choice he'd laid at her feet. A week later, the hospital threatened to discharge her father. They had bills to pay, other patients to treat. They couldn't keep carrying the costs. Aaliyah's mother cornered her in the hospital hallway, her voice sharp with desperation. I don't know where you went last week, but whoever it is, whatever they offered, take it. Your father is dying. He has days, maybe weeks. I've told you and told you to stop waiting for that boy. He's dead. Let the dead rest. The living have to live. The words were cruel, but they were true. If Ethan was dead, she had to move on. She had to save her father. He had to survive. That night, Aaliyah made the call that would change everything. Marcus, it's me. Your offer still stands. I accept. There was no wedding. No ceremony. Just papers signed, a transaction completed. Marcus paid every hospital bill, covered every treatment. Her father's life was saved. And Aaliyah's soul withered a little more each day. Marcus tried. She would give him that. He was kind, patient, generous. He gave her a beautiful home, financial security, everything except the one thing she needed, to feel anything other than numb. When she looked at him, she saw Ethan. When he touched her, she felt like she was betraying a ghost. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the dead could see the living, and if Ethan could see what she'd become. Her mother was satisfied. Her father, recovering slowly, looked at her with sad eyes that understood too much. He'd never been happy about the arrangement, but he was alive, and that was supposed to be enough. It wasn't. Marcus noticed, of course. You're not happy, he said one evening, his voice resigned. I'm trying, Aaliyah replied, which was true. She was trying to be grateful, trying to move on, trying to feel something other than this crushing emptiness. I know you loved him, Marcus said. But he's gone, Aaliyah. I'm here. Can't that be enough? It should have been. Any reasonable person would say it should have been enough. But love isn't reasonable, and grief doesn't follow logic. A year passed in this strange half-life. Aaliyah played the role of wife, went through the motions, and felt herself disappearing a little more each day. Then one afternoon, everything shattered. She was home alone when she heard the knock at the door. Probably a delivery, she thought absently, moving to answer it. She opened the door. And there he was. Thin. Older. Thinner. His face carved with experiences she couldn't imagine. But unmistakably, impossibly him. Time stopped. Aaliyah couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was seeing. This was a dream. A hallucination. The dead didn't come back. Aaliyah, he breathed, and his voice shattered whatever fragile reality she'd been clinging to. He was real. Tim was alive. What are you doing here? He asked, his eyes scanning her, the house behind her, trying to understand. Why are you in Marcus's house? Why are you dressed like you live here? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to face. And then Aaliyah did something she hadn't done in over a year. She cried. Not the silent tears of grief she'd grown used to. These were wrenching, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside her. All the pain, all the loss, all the impossible choices came pouring out. They said you were dead, she managed between sobs. Marcus said you were gone. He said you disappeared. He said. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face, followed quickly by something darker. Rage. I have to go, he said, his voice tight. Ethan, wait. But he was already turning, already walking away, and Aaliyah couldn't move, couldn't follow. She stood in that doorway and watched the man she loved walk out of her life for the second time. Ethan went straight to Marcus's office. He didn't remember the drive. Didn't remember walking through the building. All he knew was that when he saw Marcus look up from his desk, something primal and furious took over. The punch landed clean across Marcus's jaw, sending him sprawling. You betrayed me, Ethan roared. Of all the women in the world, you came for mine? You told her I was dead and you married her. Marcus scrambled back, blood on his lip. You vanished. You were gone for years. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to look for me. You were supposed to protect her, not. Ethan couldn't even finish the sentence. The betrayal was too vast, too complete. He left before he could do something worse. Left before the rage consumed him entirely. His family welcomed him home with tears and joy and too many questions he couldn't answer yet. But their happiness dimmed when they saw his face, when they realized what he'd already discovered. "Where were you?" his mother asked, holding his face in her hands. "What happened to you, my son?" Ethan told them. All of it. He'd been arrested at the airport on false charges. Drugs planted in his luggage, a setup he still didn't fully understand. He'd spent nearly 3 years in a foreign prison, fighting a system that didn't care about his innocence. It was a lawyer, someone who took his case pro bono, who'd finally uncovered the truth. The real criminal had been caught. Evidence proved Ethan had been framed. The government had apologized, offered compensation for the years stolen from his life. "I tried to call," Ethan said, his voice hollow, "as soon as I was released. But the numbers didn't work. I tried to reach her, but nothing went through. And I thought, I'd been gone so long. I'd wasted so much time in that place. I couldn't come home empty-handed. Not after everything." So he'd stayed, worked, used the compensation money and the lawyer's connections to build something. To finally become the man he'd always wanted to be. "I was coming home to marry her," he said quietly. "I had everything planned. And instead..." His mother held him while he cried. This grown man who'd survived prison and betrayal and the death of every dream he'd carried. The divorce happened quietly. Aaliyah's mother raged. Called her foolish. Called her stupid. Said she was throwing away security for a ghost of the past. But Aaliyah's father, weaker but alive, held her hand and said, "Do what your heart tells you, my daughter. We'll survive." Aaliyah left her parents' house. The disappointment and constant judgment were suffocating. She was old enough, earned enough, had saved enough. She found a small apartment in a different part of the city and moved out. It was the first time in her life she'd ever lived alone. The silence was deafening. The first night she couldn't sleep. The apartment felt too empty, too quiet, too full of her own thoughts. Around 2 a.m., exhausted and desperate, she found the bottle of wine she'd bought for cooking. 1 glass to help her sleep, she told herself. It worked. So she did it again the next night. And the night after that. Within weeks, 1 glass became 2. 2 became 3. Sleeping without alcohol became impossible. The bottle became her companion, her comfort, the only thing that could silence the screaming in her head. He went to work, functioned, smiled when required. But inside she was drowning, and the alcohol was the only thing keeping her head above water. Months passed in a blur. She stopped answering calls from her family. Stopped going out except for work. Her apartment remained mostly empty. A bed, a chair, bottles lined up like soldiers against the wall. Some nights, when she was drunk enough, she'd think about Ethan. Wonder where he was. Wonder if he thought about her. Wonder if he hated her for marrying his best friend, even though she'd thought he was dead. The wondering never helped. So she'd drink more until even the wondering stopped. Sophie, Ethan's cousin, had always liked Aaliyah. They'd been friends long before Ethan had even asked Aaliyah out, and Sophie had been thrilled when they'd fallen in love. When Aaliyah left and disappeared into her new life, Sophie had worried. When she heard about the divorce, she'd worried more. But it was Ethan's mother who finally asked her to check in. "I know my son is angry," his mother had said. "But that girl loved him. Whatever happened, it's destroying her too. Someone should check." Sophie called. And called. And called. When Aaliyah finally picked up on the 4th try, Sophie immediately knew something was wrong. The voice on the other end was slurred, incoherent, nothing like the articulate woman Sophie knew. "Aaliyah? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Why were you calling?" "You don't sound fine. Are you sick?" "Just tired. So tired." "Aaliyah, where are you? Send me your address." In her haze, Aaliyah did. Later, she wouldn't even remember the call. Sophie left work early the next day and drove across the city. When Aaliyah answered the door after 5 minutes of knocking, Sophie barely recognized her. The woman standing before her was gaunt, her eyes hollow, her clothes hanging off a frame that had lost too much weight. The apartment behind her was a nightmare of empty bottles and neglect. "Oh my God," Sophie breathed. "Aaliyah, how long have you been like this?" Aaliyah blinked slowly, confused. "Like what?" "Like..." Sophie gestured helplessly at everything. "When did you send me your address?" "I didn't send you anything. How did you know where I live?" "You sent it to me last week. You were drunk when you called me. Do you even remember calling me?" Aaliyah sank onto the single chair, the weight of realization hitting her. She'd been so drunk she couldn't even remember. How many other things had she forgotten? "I'm always like this now," she said flatly. "Just leave me alone. I want to be alone." No, Sophie's voice was firm. "You don't get to destroy yourself like this. Have you been eating? When's the last time you had a real meal?" Leah couldn't remember. "This stops now," Sophie said. "Either we talk about this or I'm calling your parents and mine, and you know what will happen then. Everyone will know. Everyone will be here. Or you can talk to me right now, just us." The threat worked. Aaliyah broke. It poured out of her. The sleepless nights, the crushing guilt, the desperate need to just stop thinking for a few hours. How work was the only thing holding her together, and even that was slipping. How she'd take extra shifts to avoid going home, but then mess everything up because she couldn't focus. How the only time she felt anything close to peace was when she was drunk enough to forget her own name. Sophie listened, her heart breaking. When Aaliyah finally stopped talking, Sophie took her hands. "You need help. Real help. This isn't just grief anymore. You're drowning and you don't know how to swim. I think you need to see someone. A therapist. Someone who isn't me, isn't Ethan, isn't Marcus. Someone who doesn't know your history and can help you figure out how to live with it." Aaliyah wanted to refuse. But looking around her apartment at the bottles and the emptiness, she couldn't deny that Sophie was right. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Before her first therapy appointment, Aaliyah went out. Some co-workers had invited her to an end-of-month celebration at a club. She'd declined every invitation for months, but something in her wanted to try. To pretend to be normal for one night. She regretted it the moment she walked in. The music was too loud. The lights too bright. And she'd had too much to drink before she even arrived, trying to quiet the anxiety of being around people. Everything she'd buried came rushing back. The anger. The resentment. The unfairness of it all. When someone stepped on her foot and didn't apologize, Aaliyah shoved them. Hard. The person shoved back. Words were exchanged. And then hands. Aaliyah barely registered what was happening before she was surrounded. The woman had friends, and they all decided Aaliyah needed to be taught a lesson. She woke up the next morning with bruises blooming across her face, her ribs aching, and the vague memory of being pulled out of a club by security. Her therapy appointment was a week later. Dr. Sarah Chin was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put Aaliyah on edge. She didn't want kindness. She didn't deserve kindness. "Those are fresh bruises," Dr. Chin observed. "Got into a fight," Aaliyah said shortly. "Some girls at a club. It's fine. Not what we're here to talk about. Isn't it?" Aaliyah looked up sharply. "You're here because someone who cares about you is worried you're destroying yourself," Dr. Chin said gently. "A bar fight that left you injured seems very relevant to me. But we can start wherever you're comfortable." For the next 45 minutes, Aaliyah talked. Or tried to. It was harder than she'd expected, putting words to the chaos inside her head. When the session ended, Dr. Chin walked her to the door. "Same time next week?" Aaliyah nodded, exhausted. "And Aaliyah, please try not to get into any more fights before then." Might have been a joke. Aaliyah couldn't tell anymore. Ethan's session was scheduled for the week after. He hadn't wanted to come. Therapy felt like admitting defeat, admitting that he couldn't handle his own problems. But 3 months back home and he was barely functioning. Work was impossible. He'd try to focus on reports, on meetings, on the business he was trying to build, but his mind would wander back to that moment in Marcus's doorway. Back to Aaliyah's face when she saw him. Back to the realization that the woman he loved had married his best friend. He started drinking to sleep. Not every night, but enough that he noticed. Enough that it scared him. So when his mother gently suggested therapy, he'd agreed. Dr. Chin came recommended. Professional. Discreet. What no one mentioned was that she only had office hours 2 days a week with limited slots. Ethan's appointment was right after the previous client's session ended. He arrived early, sitting in the small waiting area, trying to prepare himself for whatever this was going to be. The door to the therapy office opened, and Aaliyah walked out. She was wearing dark glasses despite being indoors, her hair pulled back, her whole posture screaming that she wanted to be invisible. Ethan knew her anyway. Would know her anywhere. His eyes dropped to her face, to the fading bruises visible even through the dark glasses. Something in him cracked. Concern flooded through him before he could stop it, before he could remember that he was supposed to be angry, supposed to be hurt. All he saw was that she was injured, and every instinct he had screamed to protect her. He stood, moving toward her before he could think. "What happened to you?" Aaliyah froze. Looked up. Saw him. For one moment, everything she'd been holding together fell apart. The shame crashed over her. That he was seeing her like this, that he knew she was here, that she'd fallen so far from the woman he'd once loved. "Please don't," she whispered and pushed past him. He caught her hand just for a second. His face was full of worry, of care, of all the things she didn't deserve. He pulled away and fled. Ethan stood in that waiting room, his hand still raised from where he'd touched her, and felt something shift inside him. His therapy session was a blur. He barely remembered what he said. All he could think about was Aaliyah's face, those bruises, the way she'd looked at him like she was ashamed to exist in the same space. When he got home, he couldn't sleep. The image of her stayed with him. The dark glasses, the hurried steps, how small she'd looked. Fragile in a way he'd never seen before. He told himself to let it go. Told himself it wasn't his place anymore. But by morning he knew he couldn't. He called Sophie. "I need to ask you about Aaliyah," he said without preamble. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. "Why now? You haven't wanted to hear anything about her for months." "Bez, I saw her yesterday. She had bruises on her face. And I need to know if she's okay." "I'm not supposed to tell you this," Sophie said carefully. "She asked me not to tell anyone in the family." "Sophie, please." And so she told him. About the phone calls that went unanswered. About the slurred voice when Aaliyah finally picked up. About the empty apartment with nothing but a bed, a chair, and bottles everywhere. About a woman who'd stopped living and was only surviving. Ethan said nothing while she spoke. Couldn't speak around the tightness in his throat. "She's getting help now," Sophie added. "She's seeing a therapist. He's trying. But Ethan, she's not okay. She hasn't been okay for a long time." When the call ended, Ethan sat in the silence of his room and felt grief wash over him. Not the angry, betrayed grief he'd been carrying. This was different. Deeper. For the first time since he'd come home, he asked himself not why she did what she did, but what it had cost her. He'd been so consumed by his own pain that he hadn't asked if she was still standing. And now he knew. She wasn't. They were both drowning, separately, in the wreckage of what they'd lost. They didn't reach out to each other. Aaliyah continued her therapy sessions. Some weeks were better than others. Dr. Chen was patient, methodical, helping her untangle the mess of guilt and grief and self-destruction she'd built around herself. "You're using alcohol to avoid feeling," Dr. Chen said one session. "But the feelings are still there, Aaliyah. They're just poisoning you from the inside." Learning to feel again was excruciating. But slowly, painfully, Aaliyah started to drink less. Started to eat more. Started to exist in her apartment without needing to be unconscious to bear it. Ethan continued his sessions too. Dr. Chen had a gift for asking the questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "You're angry she married him," Dr. Chen observed one day. "But have you ever asked yourself what you would have done in her position?" Ethan wanted to say yes. Wanted to say he'd thought about it. But he hadn't. He'd been too busy drowning in betrayal to consider what desperation looked like from the other side. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Let me ask you something else, then. If the anger was gone, what would remain?" The question sat in Ethan's chest like a weight. He thought about it for days. Weeks. Turned it over and over in his mind during sleepless nights and long afternoons. If the anger was gone, what would remain? The answer scared him. Love. Not the innocent, easy love they'd had before. But something deeper. Bruised. A love that had survived years apart, lies, betrayal, prison, an impossible choice, and the darkest parts of both of them. It was still there. Battered and bleeding but alive. Aaliyah came to the same realization in her own time, through her own painful process. Dr. Chen had asked her, "What are you really angry about?" "Everything," Aaliyah had said. "I'm angry he left. I'm angry I had to choose. I'm angry Marcus lied. I'm angry my father got sick. I'm angry Ethan came back. I'm angry I can't go back and change it. I'm angry that loving him has only ever hurt." And under the anger, Aaliyah had cried then. "I still love him. After everything. I still love him and I hate myself for it." "Why do you hate yourself for loving him?" "Because I don't deserve to." I married his best friend. I broke every promise we made to each other. Did you have a choice? There's always a choice. Is there? Dr. Chen's voice was gentle. Your father was dying. They told you Ethan was dead. You were desperate and alone. That's not a choice, Aaliyah. That's survival. Took months for those words to sink in. Months of slowly, painfully learning to forgive herself for being human, for breaking under an impossible weight. When Ethan texted her, Aaliyah stared at her phone for 10 minutes before opening it. Can we talk? Just talk. Nothing more. Neutral ground. Coffee. Daylight. He should have said no. Should have protected the fragile healing she'd built. But Sophie's words echoed in her mind. He's been asking about you. Not with anger. With concern. She texted back, okay. They met at a cafe neither of them had been to before. Daylight streaming through windows. Public enough to feel safe. Neutral enough to not carry memories. Aaliyah arrived first, ordered tea she didn't drink and tried to control her shaking hands. When Ethan walked in, she saw that he looked different. Older. Tired. But his eyes when they met hers weren't angry. They sat across from each other, two people who'd once known everything about each other and now knew nothing. Thank you for coming, Ethan said. Aaliyah nodded, not trusting her voice. I need to understand. Not to judge. Not to punish. Just to understand. So Aaliyah told him. Everything. She told him about the months of silence, the growing fear, Marcus returning with news that felt like death. About her father's illness, the impossible costs, the desperation that had driven her to Marcus's office. About the choice that wasn't a choice, the marriage that was a transaction, the year she'd spent as a ghost in her own life. He told him about the drinking, the fights, the apartment full of bottles, the shame that had nearly destroyed her. Ethan listened, really listened, didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself, just sat with her pain until she finished. Then it was his turn. He told her about the arrest. The terror of being in a foreign prison, not speaking the language, not understanding the system. The months of fighting to prove his innocence while the world forgot he existed. The lawyer who finally believed him. The compensation that felt meaningless after years stolen. He told her about trying to call, the numbers that didn't work, the choice he'd made to stay and build something rather than come home broken and empty-handed. How he'd worked himself to exhaustion, driven by the dream of finally being worthy of her. I thought I was coming home to marry you, he said, his voice breaking. I had it all planned. I was finally going to be enough. And then you found me in his house, Aaliyah finished. I didn't understand, Ethan said. I couldn't see past my own hurt. All I saw was betrayal. I didn't see what you'd been through. I didn't ask. I was so angry. There were tears. From both of them. Silent tears that fell like rain. There were silences too. Long moments where words weren't enough. Where they just sat with the weight of everything they'd lost and everything that had broken between them. And finally there was forgiveness. Not dramatic. Not shouted or declared. Just a quiet, mutual understanding that they had both been victims of circumstances neither could control. I'm sorry, Ethan said. For not being there. For not coming home. For not understanding. I'm sorry, Aaliyah whispered. For not waiting. For not being strong enough. For marrying him. You survived, Ethan said, reaching across the table to take her hand. That's what you did. You survived the only way you knew how. I can't be angry at you for that. Not anymore. They sat there, hands joined across the table, and felt something shift. The anger was gone. The blame was gone. What remained was complicated and messy and real. What remained was love. But it was different now. Not innocent. Not untouched. This was a love that had been through fire and came out scarred. I don't know what this means, Aaliyah said. I don't know what we are now. Neither do I, Ethan admitted. But I know I don't want to lose you again. Not like this. Not with all this pain between us. I can't promise you forever, Aaliyah said carefully. I can barely promise you tomorrow. So, I'm still putting myself back together. I know. Me too. Ethan squeezed her hand. So let's not promise forever. Let's just promise honesty. Let's promise to try. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. It was two broken people choosing to try. And for now that was enough. They didn't rush back into each other's arms. They walked slowly, carefully, like people learning to trust solid ground after an earthquake. Some days were good. They'd meet for coffee, talk about safe things, work, books, the weather. Slowly rebuilding the friendship that had existed before the romance. Some days were hard. The past would rear up. A memory, a word, a look, and one of them would retreat, needing space to process. Some nights, fear whispered that love wasn't enough. That too much had been broken. That they were fooling themselves thinking they could salvage anything from the wreckage. But they kept trying. Ethan started showing up at Aaliyah's apartment with groceries. "You need to eat more," he'd say, unpacking fresh vegetables and bread. Aaliyah started calling him when the nights were bad, when the urge to drink felt overwhelming. "Just talk to me," he'd say. "Tell me about your day. Tell me anything." And she would. She'd talk until her breathing steadied, until the craving passed, until she felt safe enough to sleep sober. 3 months after that first coffee, Ethan showed up at her door with paint samples. "Your apartment is too empty," he said. "It feels like you're punishing yourself. Let's make it feel like a home." They spent a weekend painting her walls a soft, warm yellow. They bought a small table, a comfortable couch, curtains that let in light. They hung pictures. Nothing specific, just images of places neither of them had been, representing futures they might build. Aaliyah cried when they finished, looking around at the space that finally felt like it belonged to a living person instead of a ghost. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan pulled her into a hug, the first time they'd really touched since that day at the therapist's office. "You deserve to live somewhere that feels like hope," he said. 6 months in, Aaliyah had a setback. She'd been doing so well. Weeks without drinking. Sleeping through the nights. Even laughing sometimes, which felt like a miracle. Then her mother called with news that her father's illness was returning. Not critical yet, but concerning. He'd need tests. Possibly more treatment. The panic came roaring back. Aaliyah found herself standing in front of a liquor store at 10 p.m., shaking, desperate for the numbness she'd worked so hard to leave behind. She called Ethan instead. He was there in 15 minutes. He didn't lecture her. Didn't tell her she was strong enough to resist. He just took her hand and said, "Let's walk." They walked for 2 hours through the city. Ethan talked about nothing and everything. Stories from work, memories from childhood, plans for the future. Distraction and companionship until the craving passed. "Thank you," Aaliyah said when he finally drove her home. "Always," Ethan replied. "I'm here. No matter what. Even on the bad days." It was the first time either of them had said something close to a promise since that coffee shop conversation. For Ethan, the hard days came in waves too. Some mornings he'd wake up angry all over again. Not at Aaliyah but at Marcus. At the unfairness of it all. At the years they'd lost. He'd mentioned it in therapy and Dr. Chen had said something that stuck with him. Anger is just grief in disguise. You're not angry at what happened. You're grieving what could have been. On those days he'd call Aaliyah and say, "I'm having a bad day. Can I come over?" And she'd say yes. They'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in silence. Just existing in the same space. Proof that they were both real, both still trying, both still here. One evening, sitting on her yellow-painted couch, Aaliyah rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "That we're broken. That we can't fix this. That loving each other isn't enough." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Maybe we can't fix it," he said finally. "Maybe there's nothing to fix. Maybe we're just different now. Different people than we were. And maybe that's okay." "Is it enough?" Aaliyah asked. "Being different?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "But I know I'd rather be different with you than perfect without you." It wasn't poetry, but it was true. A year after that first coffee shop conversation, they went back to the cafe. Same table. Same neutrality. But everything was different. They'd grown comfortable with each other again. Not the thoughtless comfort of youth, but something harder one. They knew each other's triggers now. Knew when to push and when to give space. Knew that some days loving each other meant being together and some days it meant being apart. "I want to try something real with you," Ethan said. "Not hiding behind taking it slow or being careful. I want to actually try. For real." Aaliyah looked at him. This man she'd loved, lost, found, and was slowly learning to love again in an entirely different way. "I want that too," she said. "But I need you to know. I'm not the same person you left. I don't think I can ever be that girl again. Good, Ethan said. Because I'm not the same person who left either. And I don't want to go back. I want to move forward. With you. With whoever we are now. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they held hands across the table and it felt like a beginning. 18 months after their reunion they took a trip together. Nothing big. Just a weekend away to a small town neither of them had been to. Neutral ground. New memories. They stayed in separate rooms at first. Still careful. Still respectful of boundaries. But on the second night Aaliyah knocked on his door at 2 a.m. I can't sleep, she said. Not because of nightmares. Not because I want to drink. I don't want to be alone. Ethan opened the door wider. Come in. They lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, just existing in the same space. Aaliyah's head on his chest. Ethan's hand in her hair. I love you, she whispered. I never stopped. Even when I should have. Even when I tried. I love you too, Ethan said. Even when I was angry. Even when I thought I hated you. It was always love underneath. They fell asleep like that. Together. And when morning came they woke up tangled in each other and it felt like home. 2 years after the divorce, Aaliyah went back to see her father. He was recovering again, stronger this time. Her mother was still critical, still judgmental, but Aaliyah had learned not to let it pierce her. I'm happy, Aaliyah told her father. Finally. For the first time in years I'm actually happy. Her father, wise and kind, took her hand. That's all I ever wanted for you, my daughter. Not security. Not safety. Just happiness. I'm with Ethan again, she said. We're taking it slow. But it's real. Her father smiled. He came to see me last month. Did he tell you? Aaliyah's eyes widened. No. He asked for my blessing. Said he knew he'd lost the right to it years ago, but he wanted to do things properly this time. Wanted me to know his intentions were honorable. Tears filled Aaliyah's eyes. What did you say? I told him that my blessing was never his to lose. It was always yours to give. They didn't get married. Not right away. They dated. Really dated. Learned each other again from the ground up. Discovered new things. That Ethan liked terrible action movies now. That Aaliyah had developed a love for cooking. That they both woke up early and enjoyed morning walks together. They fought sometimes. Real fights about real things. Money, family, how much time to spend together versus apart. But they'd learned how to fight. How to express hurt without weaponizing it. How to apologize and mean it. They celebrated small victories. Aaliyah's 6 months sober, then a year. Ethan's business taking off. Both of them learning to sleep through the night without medication or alcohol or fear. 3 years after their reunion, on a quiet Tuesday evening, Ethan said, I want to marry you. Not because we have to. Not because anyone expects it. But because I choose you. Every day I choose you. And I want to keep choosing you for the rest of my life. Aaliyah smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep inside, from a place that had finally healed enough to feel joy without fear. Yes, she said. Let's choose each other. The wedding was small. Intimate. Just family and close friends. Aaliyah's parents were there. Her father proud, her mother finally softened by time and evidence that her daughter had found genuine happiness. Ethan's family was there, his mother crying happy tears, his sister beaming. Sophie stood as Aaliyah's bridesmaid, the friend who'd saved her when she'd been drowning. Marcus was not invited. They'd heard he'd left the city, gone somewhere far away. Neither of them cared to know where. When they said their vows, they didn't promise forever. They'd learned that forever was too big, too uncertain. Instead they promised today. And tomorrow. And the day after that. I promise to choose you, Ethan said. Every day. Even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. I promise to be honest, Aaliyah said. Even when it's scary. Even when the truth hurts. I promise to meet you where you are, whoever you are. They kissed and it felt like both an ending and a beginning. Years later, when people asked them how they made it work, how they survived everything that should have destroyed them, they never quite knew what to say. The truth was complicated. Messy. Not the stuff of fairy tales. The truth was that love hadn't saved them. They'd saved themselves first. Separately. Through therapy and hard work and learning to exist in their own skin again. And then when they were both standing on solid ground, love had met them there. Not the innocent, easy love of their youth. but something deeper. Harder. A love that knew what it cost to survive and chose to survive anyway. They didn't get back what they'd lost. Those years were gone along with the people they'd been. But they built something new. Something scarred and fragile and achingly real. They learned to laugh together without fearing it would end. To sleep together without nightmares. To plan futures without the ghost of the past haunting every decision. Some days the past still came back. A memory. A trigger. A moment of fear that this too would be taken away. But they'd learned how to sit with those moments. To say, I'm scared and here, I know. Me too. But we're here now. They learned that healing wasn't a destination but a practice. Something they chose over and over, every single day. And on the days when choosing was hard, and there were many, they reminded each other of the question that had changed everything. If the anger was gone, what would remain? Love. Bruised, battered, but unbroken. Always love remained. 5 years after their wedding, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Aaliyah's head rested on Ethan's shoulder. His hand held hers, their fingers intertwined in a way that had become as natural as breathing. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found our way back? Aaliyah asked. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. But not as much as I used to. What changed? I stopped living in what ifs, he said. Started living in what is. Aaliyah smiled. And what is? Ethan looked at her. This woman who'd broken his heart and helped him heal it, who'd survived what should have destroyed her, who chose him every day even when choosing was hard. This, he said simply. You and me. Here. No. Choosing each other. That's what is. Is it enough? She asked, echoing a question she'd asked years ago. But this time Ethan's answer was different.